Good morning, everyone. I'm Ian Murray, the president of SpotOn Productions. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the SpotOn Spotlight. I'm really excited about our guest today. We are being joined by a good friend and colleague, I'll say, Pam Beigh. So, Pam, welcome to the SpotOn Spotlight.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, Pam, you and I have worked together over a number of years on sales projects, and I really value your insight. So, I'm really excited about today and kind of talking about what's changed in sales. So, to kick us off, tell me what is SalesCORE and how do you help customers improve their sales?
We are a sales consulting firm, and we help leaders who get frustrated when the strategy is going one direction, sales is going in another. How do we bridge that gap? And the answer and the solution really falls in the laps of sales leadership. So we work mostly with sales leadership in organizations, and we look at putting a roadmap together and how do we fix this problem and how do we create alignment with where the business wants to go, and looking for root causes of what's not working. Some organizations and a lot of organizations say, okay, it's a people problem. Well, it's not always a people problem. We really like to look at the process and the systems and then figure out what's the best place for those people. And that's one of my passions is how do we get people in their highest and best use role? Everybody wins.
I love that. It's that right people, right seat, making sure everybody has the tools they need to succeed.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
Pam, your career started out in a traditional sales environment, but you've shifted to a focus on matching the business needs with sales results, especially for those mid to medium sized companies. What inspired that change in your career path, and how do you see that approach benefiting those companies that you work with?
So it's interesting that I think about this story, especially around September. You remember on September 11th how beautiful that morning was?
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a cloud in the sky, it was sunny. It was one day like that. I was driving to a client. I loved this client, and I loved most of my clients and loved the people I worked with. But I was doing systems integration sales, which is computer software.
Mm-hmm.
And, I could have cared less about a network and a data cube. And that's a problem. If the salesperson doesn't care about it, that's a problem. So I'm driving down the road. I've got that feeling in the pit of my stomach that something's not right. So I started looking at what would next step be. And I have training in my background and decided I don't want to start a sales training company because the training has its place, but a
Mm-hmm.
lot of things have to come before that. And I wanted to do something more strategic. So I did some research, and this was early 2000s. And I said, there's this field called sales effectiveness, and all that is aligning sales to the business. I said, I really want to start pursuing that. So we created a model. I used a Six Sigma model. My husband's a Six Sigma guy, so we put my model
Nice.
together, and then I started looking at all the research that was coming out and what's working in sales and not working in sales. And all this research was coming from the big companies. And I really wanted to bring that to family businesses, privately held businesses, because I really wanted to help them compete with the big guys. And so I created this model for how do we help sales leadership help the sales people. And again, it goes back to that three-legged stool. When you've got the right people and you've got the right structure, the customer wins, the company wins, and the person wins. So I really focus on that. How do we get everybody to win?
I love that because I think that is something that's not addressed a lot of times in sales, where it's so much on the here's how we do sales, here's the pipeline, here's the process, but focusing on that top level, how are we leading people into that? On that line, you talk a lot about the importance of that leadership playbook, especially when it comes to family owned and privately held companies. What is a leadership playbook, and why is it essential for organizations to have one in place?
The sales leadership book really is a toolkit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a toolkit that we work with sales leadership and say, here are the tools that most organizations need. How do we customize it based on your environment, your culture, what you're selling, who your customers are? So we customize those tools, and then we help sales leadership implement those tools. And it's so that we don't take a shotgun approach to sales. Here's your brochure, go out and sell. And what have you done for me lately? I've lived through that kind of environment. And again, nobody wins in that kind of environment. So if you get the right talent and you give them the right structure, you're going to get more sales and more sales faster. But most sales leaders don't know how to do that. Sales is tough enough as it is. Without that structure, it's really hard for them to be successful. So it helps everybody stay on the same page. It helps identify problems early on. So an example of that is I had this happen for myself. I stopped winning business. My close ratio was really high, and a couple of years ago I stopped winning business. So I started looking at my structure, saying, where am I losing that business? And then it
Yeah.
helped me understand why I'm losing that business. I was trying to sell things to people that they didn't understand what they were buying. So I had that year said, I want to go after larger customers. So I used the same process that small customers appreciated, the larger customers didn't. And so I needed to add a step to my process, which I did, and my close ratios went right back up.
That's
The other
awesome.
reason it's important, especially in today's market, is A players, if you're trying to attract A players, in this hiring process, we've seen this happen so many times. In the hiring process, an A player will come in and they'll start to interview you as the company and say, what tools do you have in place to help me be successful?
Hmm.
And if you don't have the tools and the structure, they will exit out of the hiring process and you lose out on that really good candidate. So it's important to keep everybody together, same page, give them the structure, give them the tools, and then let them shine.
That's awesome. And I love that you told us that years ago is you have to make sure that the customer understands what they're buying before they sign that contract.
Yeah, yeah. It's so important. That's the piece that I was missing, but I had the playbook that
Hmm.
helped me analyze where is it that I'm missing, and I could dive deep and say, this is what I'm doing wrong.
And that's a great point too. As we know, life changes all the time. So what had been working, if it stops, it's that chance to pause and evaluate and say, "All right, what happened? How can we get this back on track?"
Right. The playbook helps you not only understand where you're going, but it helps you understand how often should I be analyzing these things and what should I be analyzing.
I love that. So part of that too, I think, has to probably do with the change in the sales landscape. Changing sales trends and how people are buying and looking for vendors. With the heightened focus on that customer-centric strategy, how do you see changes affecting small to mid-sized businesses differently from larger organizations, especially after I know COVID-19 was years ago, but I think we're still feeling some of the effects of that. So, how do you see those changes affecting small to mid-sized businesses post COVID-19?
Yeah, I think there's good news in that answer. A lot of small businesses felt it and started to get paralyzed and still are somewhat paralyzed. But the good news is with a small business, and this is why I like working with small businesses, is you can see change happen. So the small businesses can impact change and move things quickly if they have the right tools in place to be able to analyze it. So what's happened over the years is the advent of the internet, even though it seems like it's been years ago, has changed the way the buyers buy. And that started back in the very early 2000s. And then we saw what happened in 08, 09. And there was a book called Mind of the Customer that came out, and it was about research and what executives want. And they don't want you to talk about their kids' pictures on the walls. They want to talk about how can you solve my problems. And I want to work with a person of integrity. And they defined integrity as do what you say you're going to do and help me solve my business problems. And so we went until COVID, and organizations were feeling it a little bit, but COVID really intensified this fact that the buyers are in so much more control today. 85% or more of the decision is already made before an organization reaches out to you for business, and they think they know their problem. And the challenge is they don't always know what their problem is. So we have to be ready to help them understand what that problem is, get engaged a little bit earlier in their decision-making process, and that can be a challenge. But there's
Yeah.
something called insight selling that helps people really focus on how do I help understand my buyer's problems. And there's a statistic from the research that came out since COVID. 65% of the salespeople think they put the customer first, but
Mm-hmm.
only 23% of the buyers believe that.
Oh, wow.
So they're not, yeah, they're not feeling it. They're not feeling that we really understand their problems. We may make that assertion on a surface level, but we have to get deeper. So it's creating this thing called buyer apathy. And the biggest reason for buyer apathy is the salesperson doesn't understand my business need. That's coming straight from the research. And we have to be able to have the right. And I ask myself this question, I ask my clients this question. If you have a meeting with a decision maker, what's your right to be there? You have to have the right and build value. And I like to say, if I'm in front of a decision maker or any sales call, that person would have paid for that sales call. And the thinking used to be, don't spill your candy in the lobby and don't say too much. Well, we really have to show credibility and provide value. And the way to do that is what we call insight selling. And it comes down to knowing three things to even ask for the meeting.
Yeah.
What are the industry issues? What are the company's specific issues? And where have I helped people before? And I have a beautiful story that is an example of this. I used to play this game with a guy that I used to sell with. It was called Thumbs Up, Thumbs Down. And he would send a group of us emails and phone calls that he would get from salespeople. And he would say, call them back, don't call them back. So one day he sent us this message. He was the VP of IT at a restaurant chain. And the email said, we know point of sale systems are really important to gathering information from all your restaurants. We know you're having a problem implementing your point of sale system. We've helped Bob Evans, Ruby Tuesdays, named a couple of others. Would you like to talk? That's the kind of information and message that decision makers need to have before they're going to accept a telephone call, an email, or a meeting.
Versus that chihuahua, like, hey, I do this. Can we talk? Like, it's not very helpful to me.
Now, that's not helpful for me.
That's a great story. There's another story too you tell, and you don't have to, name names, but the story of like the gentleman who you knew the research, you talked to the people that he supplies ahead of time, because it was why should I talk to you? Why should I spend my time on you? Can you share that story?
Oh yeah, that's a fun story. So it was a casket company,
Mm-hmm.
and I was referred in to the COO, and I appreciated that referral. Took the call, but then I did my research, and I talked to customers. I talked to their customers, not the dead people, but the funeral home
That's good.
directors.
Otherwise, you got a whole other skill set.
Yeah. So I talked to them. So when I walked into that meeting, though I had been referred, I know he had thought this is going to be a 20-minute meeting. And he said to me, what do you know about us? I said, well, I know your largest profit margin product, caskets, is declining because of the trend in cremation. And your funeral home directors are pushing on you. And we've helped organizations look at that. And I named some organizations. 2 hours later, though I didn't get a
Wow.
project, I confirmed that what he did in hiring a chief sales officer was the right thing to do to solve his problem. So I built credibility and I enjoyed the conversation. And I know that he thought very highly of me as I walked out the door because he said so in the way I handled the entire conversation.
That's so awesome. So there's work that has to take place on the front end to do this kind of selling. How can sales teams do that better to understand the buyer's needs, to reduce that buyer apathy?
Good question, and I've been doing a lot of work with organizations to help them implement that 3-bullet system. But the very first thing is, please don't go to a decision maker and ask them what's their pain and what keeps them up at night.
And that was
They
the
are
standard
not.
question people always used to say, hey, what keeps you up at night?
That's right. Decision makers don't have time for that anymore. So what we have to do is our homework, and that includes getting off the internet, yes, starting the internet, but going out and talking to people. I went out and talked to a funeral home director. Go to your LinkedIn. LinkedIn is so important in this philosophy, because if I know Ian Murray and Ian Murray knows the person that I want some information on, I'm going to call Ian and say, hey, Ian, do you know this person? And how well do you know this person? And can you give me some insight? Also, talking to folks that work in that facility. So I'm working with a relatively new sales individual right now. She has absolutely no problem calling on the phone and walking into organizations, going into the maintenance people and saying,
Oh,
hey,
wow.
what's going on in your environment? She has no problem doing it, and they are willing to talk to her. And if nobody else, really focus, call the salespeople. I've had folks do this. Call a salesperson. Hey, I'm not trying to sell you something. Can I buy you a cup of coffee, or could you spend 15 minutes with me on the phone? Tell me a little bit about your organization.
It's a
And we had
sympathetic
one.
friend. They understand your pain.
Yes, it's a sympathetic friend. And what salesperson is not going to accept free coffee,
Yeah.
right? But I also say engage the marketing group. I have a client right now that it's so fun to see this. The marketing person will look at specific publications and find leads, and then do the research online for them and say, these are the people, here are the decision makers, here are some of the things we found out about them. So it's a really good start, because it does take time. It will slow down the front end of your sales process, but it escalates the back end and it increases your chances of winning.
I was gonna say, it sounds like if I can close my increase my chances of closing at the end, definitely worth the time.
That's absolutely right. I also am getting this question more and more, and I appreciate this question. The question comes from the prospect. How do you differ from your competitors? And I'm very happy to talk about, here's where this person's strong, here's where this person's strong, what's your need? And I'll make a recommendation based on, you don't need to work with me, you need to work with this other person and make the referral to the other person. And that's another thing that buyers are looking for. They have big business problems. I have one client right now who they had to fire their CFO, is looking for a CFO. I made 3 recommendations, and those 3 recommendations are helping him find his next
That's awesome.
CFO.
So
Has
being a
nothing to do with me.
being a
Yeah, but
resource.
just helping him out. Yeah, absolutely.
So we're talking about salespeople need to go beyond asking generic questions, becoming true change agents. Are there any specific strategies or mindsets that salespeople should be adopting to meet those evolving expectations of informed buyers today?
Absolutely. The number one skill that we're looking for today is curiosity in a salesperson. They need to be curious about the business and understand the business and what's really happening. And the other thing is recognizing, I have never seen this problem more pronounced than I see it today. Within organizations, there is very little communication between levels and between functions. If a salesperson can bridge that communication gap, they can become not only a change agent, but they can become a part of a company's competitive advantage, because because the decision makers that have answered the research has said that if you can help me solve understand my business problems, help me solve my business problems, I'm going to trust you when it comes time to needing your type of services.
Absolutely. You're the first person they're going to want to call because you've helped them with other things.
Correct. Correct.
Along those lines of kind of good communication and working together, I don't know if you coined this, but you talk about smarketing a lot. Can you quickly touch on why smarketing is an important topic in sales?
Oh gosh, absolutely. And this is becoming more important. I listened to your webcast last week with Kendra Ramirez and about AI. We need to be thinking about AI. So let me back up. Marketing was coined by HubSpot.
Okay.
And it's the combination of marketing and sales together. And let's face it, marketing people and sales people don't think alike.
Mm-mm.
So we have to lead the two groups to work together and work collaboratively. Marketing is taking a bigger role in lead generation today, and then sales can take that lead. But what's happening is organizations are not looking at what are those leads and what's happening with those leads, and is sales following up? And the answer is no, sales is not following up for the most part. And I've asked salespeople why not.
Yeah.
Well, it's an unqualified lead, or I'm working my own leads. And so we need to build that communication between the two organizations so we can all get better and we can all drive to what's the right solution.
Yeah. I love when
Marketing,
qualified leads get dumped in my lap. That's way less work I got to do.
that's right, that's right. And if it is an unqualified lead, let's talk about it. Let's
Mm-hmm.
talk about why. And it's also important for marketing to help build that persona of who am I really looking for, so I can get that shotgun approach, or that rifle approach and not
Mm-hmm.
the shotgun approach. So if you don't have time to do all the research, and let's say you're calling on a CFO, what's the number one thing a CFO is worried about? It's cost. So why don't we talk about how we can help you with cost and make some assumptions in those three bullets of how do I help you reduce cost, knowing that that's an important piece for you to understand.
And those three bullets are what's happening in the industry, what's happening in the company, and how have I helped similar people before.
Right. And then the call to action, let's talk.
Yeah. That's amazing. Jumping back to leadership then, because we talked early on about the leadership playbook. Leadership's obviously very key to driving effective sales strategies, ensuring that customer-focused approach. What are practical steps that sales leaders can take to better coach their teams, and why is or how is that important for leaders to shift from that tracking quality-based metrics to quality-based outcomes?
Yeah, exactly. So it's about quality, not quantity. And that's the important piece to remember. So when I walk into a client and they say, well, we track number of proposals, well, do you qualify those proposals? That's how you get quality. We track number of calls. Well, do you track the quality of the calls, and do they know the three bullet points to the decision makers? That's how you look for quality versus quantity. And those are leading indicators of success. And the number one job of a sales leader is to coach the salespeople on how to do that, because most salespeople have a hard time connecting those dots between what's the business need and what's our service. And I've seen that over and over again. And the other important piece for sales leaders is to help explain the why. Why do we do this? What's our company why? And what's your why as an individual? And what's the company that we're selling to? What's their why? So that we can bring that together.
I love that. So when you're looking at, you said we need to measure the quality of our calls and the quality of our proposals. What does that look like? Is that coming up with like a ranking system, or they're like, do you put check off boxes that if it checks these three things, it was a great call or it's a great proposal? What does that look like?
So for a call, before you make the call to the decision maker, the very first question the leader needs to be asking is, what's your right to be there? And the answer should be in those three bullet points.
Okay.
Or I'm making some assumptions here. So it's diving into and looking at the pipeline, and where are you in the pipeline, and what's the information that we need to get. So when we map a sales process, it's mapped based on how the buyer buys. And then we talk about what do we need to do to leverage the playing field so we get what we need throughout the process. And we map those bullet points, and then we map what are the things that we need to understand before we can go to the next step in the process. And that's called integrity in your sales process. And if you're then measuring that as a salesperson or sales manager and having those conversations, then you can tell, does the salesperson get it, or do I have to do some coaching and development?
I love that. And we've had to put that pause button kind of into our process because, like, well, I just need a number. Just send over a proposal. Like, until we can get through these things and these steps and get these questions answered, we can't get you to that next point. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, I don't mind if we give them, I've been asked that before, so what's it gonna cost? I'll give them a broad range, and
Hmm.
I'll say, the only way I can give you a realistic number is if we go through these steps, because I wanna make sure that when I promise you that I'm gonna do something for a certain amount, that I can fulfill that promise.
Yeah. So it's we could do this for 10,000 to 100,000. How's that sound? Well, I'd like it a
Yeah.
little better. Well, then we got to have this conversation.
Right. And most of the time, what I see in the people who ask that question is they start to become more vulnerable and they let down their walls and they say, okay, I've got to give some to this relationship as well, because it really is a two-way relationship.
Yeah. All right. Last, I think, question just based off our conversation. It sounds like leaders need to be much more actively involved and engaged in the process, from deal structures to kind of customer interactions. Why is direct involvement crucial, and what's that impact have on both the sales team's performance and the overall customer experience?
Yes, it's a great question. And through the research that I read that came out after COVID, sales leadership is not really driving the sales team in this quality versus quantity. And so we have to get sales leaders to understand that, first of all. And we have to get them involved in the sales process from a level to level selling. So the salesperson is the quarterback. But as I start to move up in the organization, I might need a VP to VP conversation. So I have to set the leader up with, what do I need from you? And the leader has to be able to follow that. I can't tell you how many times when I was selling systems integration, I'd pull the leader in and the conversation went sideways. They didn't, even though I had prepped them, they weren't supporting the overall goal. So having account level plans and pursuit level plans and leadership really leaning into, here's what's needed and here's my role in that. They also can help push things through the pipeline when they get involved more with the customer, so that deal can get pushed through faster. The salespeople then feel supported. And the salespeople feel like my job is important. They understand my job. Accountability isn't about beat up. Accountability is about, how do we get better and how
Mm-hmm.
can I help you get better? And then the customer, when the sales leadership gets involved in even leadership, top leadership of the organization, the customer feels like, man, I'm important. They really get that I've got a problem here. They're invested in me and they're invested in me solving the problem.
I love that. And that's one of the things we're trying to do is we're a video production company, but we have to focus on the front end on being a highly effective sales organization, because that feeds everything else that comes after when it comes to the customer, to make sure we understood what they needed up front so that we can deliver what they need on the end.
Because if you don't understand up front, that's a project going sideways in a hurry.
Mm-hmm. And then an unhappy customer at the end of the project too, which doesn't lead to repeat work, and you don't have that relationship that could potentially bring referrals and all the other stuff that goes into a successful sales relationship.
Right, right.
I think this is excellent content, Pam. Thank you so much for your time. I do have a question I want to ask you that's kind of unrelated to sales. What's your best piece of business advice? One you've either gotten from somebody or your favorite piece to share with others?
I was so grateful for this piece of advice from my mentor. She gave me this advice before COVID, and I actually employed this when COVID hit. And that was called the red envelope. So in my drawer, I had a red envelope that if X, Y, or Z happened, here is how I would react and what levers I would pull in my business to make sure that my business survived and that people survived. And so during COVID, I pulled out that red envelope. And there were two things that I implemented from my red envelope that saved my business. One of
Wow.
them I'll share. The other one I will keep to myself. But the one that was really impactful was get back to the fundamentals. So the first 2 weeks of shutdown, I felt like, I've had my business 21 years. I felt like it was the first 2 weeks of my business again, and I
Oh,
was
wow.
scared to death.
Yeah.
So I knew I had to deal with the fear, so I got back to fundamentals, and that's what was in my red envelope. There was a sheet that I had created and put in that red envelope to help me get back to the fundamentals. And because I did that, I called people just because I cared about where they were and what was happening with them, what they were seeing. And it deepened a lot of relationships. And because of that, I was able to close additional business because I cared about what was happening with them.
That is one of the most unique pieces of business advice I think I've ever heard. I love that. So
I did too.
do you have Red Envelope 2.0 prepped and ready to go?
It is all in my drawer.
That's awesome. Oh, well, Pam, thank you so much for your time today. This was a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate it. I value your expertise in the field. Where can people connect with you, find you online?
They can find me at salescore.net. It's LASCSCORE.net. Or they can email me at pbeigh@salescore.net.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Pam, for your time. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure we will talk again soon. Thanks so much.
I appreciate you and what you're doing, Ian. This is great stuff. So keep it up.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank you.